The night was calm on Earth, quiet in the way that made people believe nothing unusual could ever happen. The skies looked the same as always, dotted with stars, but far beyond what human eyes could see, something was approaching. A ship, vast and silent, drifted into orbit. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, and inside it, beings with cold intelligence watched the world below. To them, Earth was not a place of beauty or wonder. It was a source of curiosity, perhaps even amusement. They had studied humans from a distance, measuring their wars, their inventions, and their struggles. They believed humanity was small, fragile, and not worth fearing. Yet there was something about humans that the aliens wanted to test, something they didn't fully understand. And so, on this particular night, the plan was carried out. A beam of pale light reached down, so thin and controlled that it cut through the darkness without being noticed. In an instant, a handful of people were taken, lifted without warning, their voices cut off, their bodies frozen in a strange force they could not fight. One moment they were standing on familiar ground, and the next they were gone. When they woke, the world around them was nothing like Earth. The air smelled metallic, heavy in their lungs. The walls of the room they were in were smooth and seamless, glowing faintly with colors that shifted as though alive. There were no windows, no doors they could see, only the strange sense that they were being watched. Panic rose in their throats, but no sound escaped. A soft hum filled the air, vibrating through their bones, keeping them disoriented. Then, the watchers revealed themselves. The aliens entered without footsteps, their tall frames moving as if they glided across the ground. Their skin reflected the light of the chamber, and their faces were unreadable, without expressions humans could recognize. They did not speak with mouths, yet voices echoed inside the minds of the captives. "You will not be harmed," the words pulsed in their heads, smooth but cold. "You are subjects of study. Nothing more." The humans exchanged glances. Fear lingered in their eyes, but beneath that fear was something else. Awareness. They had no control of their situation, but they were not mindless. They were awake, alert, and even as the aliens believed them to be helpless, their instincts began to awaken. The aliens assumed these new captives would collapse under pressure, like animals put into cages. They had no reason to think otherwise. For countless years, the aliens had collected creatures from across the galaxy, studied them, and discarded them when they no longer served a purpose. But what they failed to see was that humans were not like the others. As the hours passed, the humans began to notice details. The hum in the room changed pitch when the aliens entered. The glowing walls dimmed when they spoke to each other. The air seemed cooler near one side of the chamber, warmer on the other. These were small things, perhaps unimportant, but to the human mind, they were clues. And every clue was stored quietly, hidden behind expressions of fear and silence. When one of the captives reached out and touched the wall, the surface rippled under their hand like liquid glass. The aliens did not stop them. To the watchers, this was simple curiosity, nothing dangerous. They believed humans lacked the intelligence to turn these observations into anything useful. But to the captives, this was the first piece of a puzzle. Hours, blurred into what felt like days. The aliens observed constantly, scanning their bodies, recording their movements, even forcing them through strange exercises. At times, the humans were shown holographic illusions, landscapes from Earth, recreated perfectly inside the ship. The aliens seemed to want to test emotional responses, to see how humans reacted when their home was placed before them but just out of reach. Instead of despair, however, the captives began to learn. They studied how the images flickered at the edges, how the environment shimmered when they moved too quickly, and how the aliens' focus shifted whenever a human reacted strongly. Every trial became information, and every moment of weakness became a chance to understand their captors better. The aliens noticed the humans' wide eyes, the trembling of their hands, and assumed it was fear. They didn't realize that behind those eyes, thoughts were moving quickly. Humans were not just afraid, they were adapting. One of the captives began tapping lightly on the ground, a rhythm at first random, then repeated. Another responded by shifting their breathing, creating patterns. It was simple communication, quiet enough to go unnoticed by the aliens, but clear enough for the group. They were already finding ways to coordinate, even without words. The aliens had advanced machines, impossible technology, and the arrogance of believing they were superior. But humans had something else, something that did not rely on strength or weapons. They had the ability to notice, to adapt, and to turn weakness into strategy. The capture was supposed to be simple. To the aliens, it was nothing more than gathering, samples, another experiment among many. But in taking these humans, they had unknowingly begun something they could not control. Inside that smooth, glowing chamber, the first sparks of defiance were forming. Not loud, not visible, but quiet and steady, like a fire waiting to grow. The captives sat still, their bodies tense, their eyes calm. They gave no sign of the thoughts running through their minds, of the silent agreements forming between them. The aliens believed they were in complete control, but they had made a mistake. In their arrogance, they had forgotten the one truth that defined humanity. When trapped, humans do not simply surrender. They watch, they wait, and sooner or later, they act. The night on Earth had ended with silence, but in the heart of space, a new story had begun. The capture was only the first step. What came next would be something the aliens had never expected. The humans sat quietly inside the strange chamber, their hearts heavy with questions. Hours had already passed since they were pulled from Earth, yet the reality of what happened still felt unreal. They had been captured, stolen from their world, and now they were inside a place that was alive with lights and sounds they couldn't understand. Every wall shifted faintly, glowing as if it were breathing. The hum in the air pressed against their ears, and though their bodies were free to move, there was nowhere to go. The aliens had not spoken again since their first message. They simply watched. The walls sometimes flickered, and from those flickers came images, streams of light forming into screens, each one displaying the captives as if the room itself was recording them from every angle. It was unsettling, knowing that nothing they did was private. Every small movement, every whisper of breath was being studied. At first, the humans reacted the way the aliens expected. They looked frightened, nervous, and restless. Some sat with their knees pulled close, some paced in small circles, and others stared at the glowing walls, trying to find patterns that made sense. The aliens assumed it was fear, confusion, and perhaps even weakness. But what they didn't see was that this behavior was only the surface. Underneath, thoughts were moving quickly, quietly forming connections. The humans began to notice the routine. The Watchers never left them alone for long. Every few hours, the aliens entered silently, their presence filling the room with cold authority. They brought small, floating devices that scanned the humans, wrapping them in beams of light that made their skin tingle. Sometimes the devices released pulses of sound, testing how the captives reacted. Other times, the aliens projected visions directly into their minds, images of storms, deserts, cities, or even deep oceans. The goal seemed clear: to observe how humans responded to pressure, fear, or wonder. Yet the humans were not passive test subjects. With each test, they grew more aware. When the aliens showed them visions of Earth, the humans looked not only at the familiar landscapes, but also at the flickering edges, the places where the illusion bent unnaturally. They began to understand that these visions weren't real, but were meant to manipulate emotions. The aliens tried to provoke despair, but instead they planted determination. When the captives saw their planet, their homes, and their skies, they didn't fall into sadness. They grew more focused. These glimpses reminded them of what they were fighting for, of what they had to return to. The aliens had miscalculated. During one observation, the walls shifted into a scene of fire. Cities burned, and screams echoed, as if humanity itself was collapsing. The captives froze at first, their stomachs turning cold. But then, as the vision continued, they began to notice something strange. The fire moved in repeating loops. The sounds repeated after a certain rhythm. It was not real, only a designed illusion. A silent understanding spread among them. The aliens were powerful, but their tricks were not perfect, and imperfection meant possibility. When the aliens left, the captives began subtle experiments of their own. They tested the walls by pressing their hands, their shoulders, even stamping their feet lightly. The walls rippled like liquid in some places, but stayed solid in others. The floor vibrated faintly when they all moved at once, suggesting machinery beneath it. At first, they were cautious, keeping their actions small so as not to draw attention. But as time passed, they grew bolder. One tapped a steady rhythm on the ground, pretending to be restless. Another responded with a shift of breathing, a pattern repeated twice. This was no accident. It was communication. The captives were inventing a silent language, one that the aliens would not notice. The observation went both ways. While the aliens believed they were studying humans, the humans were studying them back. They noticed how the aliens tilted their heads when they were confused, how their glowing eyes dimmed slightly when concentrating. They noticed the delay between commands given to the floating machines and the machines' actions. These details seemed small, but humans had always been masters of turning small details into great advantage. The more the aliens tested them, the stronger the captives grew. They learned how to mask their emotions, hiding their thoughts behind blank stares or controlled breathing. If fear rose in their chest, they forced it down, showing only calm. If anger burned, they disguised it as silence. The aliens, so confident in their ability to read minds and emotions, began to believe the humans were becoming dull, broken, or even submissive. This was exactly what the captives wanted. For the aliens, observation was a way to measure limits. For the humans, it was an opportunity to plan. Every test gave them new knowledge. Every illusion revealed cracks in the aliens' power, and every hour spent together strengthened the silent bond between the captives. One moment stood out among the endless hours of study. The aliens projected an image of space itself, a vast darkness filled with stars, but with Earth floating alone at the center, small and defenseless. The voice in their minds echoed again. "You are fragile. You are isolated. Without us, you are nothing." The words struck hard, but instead of fear, something else rose in the captives' hearts. Fragile. Perhaps. Isolated? Maybe. But nothing? No. Humanity had survived storms, wars, hunger, and time itself. It had climbed mountains, crossed oceans, and reached the stars. Humans were far from nothing. That unspoken truth gave the captives strength. Their eyes met, and though they could not speak, they shared the same thought. The aliens did not understand humanity at all, and so the observation continued. Days felt longer, stretching endlessly in the glow of alien light. But the humans were no longer just captives. They were observers themselves, keeping track, piecing together the puzzle of their captors. The aliens had set the stage, believing they were in control. But slowly, quietly, the balance was shifting. The humans were waiting, watching, preparing. And though the aliens had no idea, every second of their study was only making their captives stronger. The aliens thought they were learning about humans. In truth, it was the humans who were learning about them, And when the moment finally came, that knowledge would become their greatest weapon. The silence in the chamber had become a constant companion, broken only by the hum of alien machinery and the low flicker of glowing walls. Days had blurred into each other, and though the humans were still trapped, their fear had shifted into something different. It was no longer the helpless panic of the first moments. It had become sharp, steady determination. Each passing hour was no longer wasted in despair, but used for thought. Plans were quietly forming, the aliens still confident. In their control, carried on with their endless tests. They believed humans were slowly bending, becoming more obedient and easier to study. What they didn't realize was that their tests were giving the captives the exact tools they needed. Every illusion, every machine, every routine revealed something. And from those small things, the humans built hope. The first clever move did not come suddenly. It started as a whisper in their eyes, a look exchanged between two of them when the aliens weren't paying attention. Then it grew into small actions, carefully timed, perfectly hidden within the normal flow of behavior. To the aliens, nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, a spark had been lit. One day, the aliens brought in a floating device again. It hovered above the humans, sending out waves of blue light that wrapped around their bodies. This machine had been used before. Its purpose was clear. It read their reactions, measured their stress, and translated emotions into patterns for the aliens to study. The humans had always stood silently through it, showing fear, confusion, or sadness, exactly what the aliens expected. But this time was different. The captives had learned that the device responded to movement, even the smallest twitch of a hand or shift of the chest. They had also learned that the machine recorded in rhythms, each reading lasting a few moments before shifting into the next. If those rhythms could be altered, maybe the readings could be confused. As the machine passed, one of the humans tapped a finger softly against their leg, hidden beneath the folds of their clothes. The machine paused for half a second, flickering with uncertainty. The alien overseer tilted its head, the faint glow in its eyes dimming as it studied the readings. But the moment passed quickly, and the machine continued. To the aliens, it was a meaningless error. To the humans, it was proof. The machines could be disrupted, not destroyed, not yet, but disrupted. And disruption meant opportunity. The next time the machine came, they acted again, but this time with more coordination. One shifted their breathing into a slow, unnatural rhythm. Another tapped their heel against the ground in a pattern disguised as nervous energy. Together their actions created interference. The machine's lights glitched briefly, flashing out of rhythm. The alien observer frowned, unsure. Yet again the humans acted as though nothing had happened, keeping their faces blank. Slowly, the humans tested more. They learned the limits of the machine, how much disruption it could take before showing obvious signs of error. They also learned something even more valuable. The aliens were not quick to suspect trickery. They assumed that any irregularity came from the machines, not from the captives. That arrogance was a shield, and the humans hid behind it. The clever move was not about breaking free in one dramatic strike. It was about planting the seeds of confusion, one moment at a time. Each disrupted reading was like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples that the aliens barely noticed. But over time, those ripples would grow. The captives began to use the tests to their advantage. When illusions of Earth appeared, they no longer reacted with despair or longing. Instead, they studied the illusions closely, marking where the images flickered, where the sounds repeated, and where the light bent unnaturally. In their silence, they were gathering knowledge, turning every test into a lesson. But the most important moment came during one of the longer observations. The aliens projected a vision of a star field, with Earth placed in the center, alone and fragile. The same voice filled their minds. "You are weak. You are surrounded by greatness. Submit, and you may survive. The humans did not speak aloud. They couldn't. But within themselves, a decision was made. Submission was not survival. Cleverness was survival. And in that moment, one of them acted. When the projection shifted to Earth's surface, showing burning cities and falling towers, the human nearest to the machine did something bold. Instead of showing fear, they laughed. It was not loud, not mocking, but just enough to echo in the silence of the chamber. The aliens froze. Their glowing eyes widened, and for the first time, hesitation filled the air. The machine faltered, its readings becoming uneven. The illusion wavered, struggling to match the unexpected response. The laughter had not been planned, but it worked. It showed the others that defiance, even in the smallest form, could confuse their captors. From that moment, subtle acts of resistance became more common. A smile in the face of a terrifying vision, a steady stare when the aliens expected fear, a calm posture when the machines scanned for panic. The clever move was no longer just about tricking the machines. It was about rewriting the story the aliens thought they were writing. Instead of being predictable subjects, the humans became unpredictable forces, and unpredictability made them dangerous. The aliens did not realize it yet, but control was slipping. The captives were no longer just sitting in silence. They were shaping the game. They were learning how to bend the tests, how to break patterns, and how to turn observation into opportunity. In the end, the first clever move was not a grand escape or a dramatic victory. It was a spark, small, hidden, but powerful enough to change everything. From that spark, the fire of resistance had begun. The captives were no longer only waiting. They were preparing. And the aliens, in their pride, had no idea that the very subjects they studied were quietly turning into their greatest threat. The chamber that once felt like a prison was now something different. It was still cold, silent, and filled with the constant hum of alien machines, but to the humans, it had quietly become a battlefield, not one of weapons or explosions, but one of the mind. The aliens believed they held complete control. They believed the humans were nothing more than weak creatures trapped in cages, slowly breaking apart under endless experiments. But that belief was their greatest mistake. The humans had discovered the first crack in their captor system. They had learned that the machines could be confused, that the illusions could be bent, and that their own emotions could become weapons. Now it was time to push further. Small disruptions had worked, but to truly gain the upper hand, they would need to outsmart their captors completely. The plan did not come all at once. It was built slowly through careful observation. Every movement of the aliens, every flicker of the glowing symbols on the walls, every delay between the machines starting and stopping, it was all studied and memorized. The captives had no tools, no weapons, but they had something far more dangerous: patience and intelligence. The aliens, however, remained blind to the growing resistance. They carried on with their routines, dragging the humans into illusions, scanning their bodies, and recording endless streams of data. To them, the humans were creatures of instinct, not strategy. They assumed that fear would break them. They never considered that fear could harden into cleverness. One day, during another round of observation, the aliens filled the chamber with a false vision of Earth under attack. Great shadows covered the sky, cities burned, oceans boiled, and voices screamed. In the past, these illusions had caused despair. But this time, the humans reacted differently. They stood still, calm, their faces unreadable. The aliens grew uneasy, waiting for signs of panic. None came. Instead, one human tilted their head as if studying the illusion with quiet curiosity. Another squinted, noticing a flaw in the projection where the light shimmered unnaturally. Together, they turned the test into a lesson, examining rather than suffering. This subtle defiance was the beginning of their strategy. By not reacting the way the aliens expected, They disrupted the flow of data. The machines, designed to record emotions, began to falter. The aliens adjusted settings, increased the strength of the visions, and even added terrifying sounds to break their silence. But the humans refused to give them what they wanted. Their stillness was more powerful than any scream. Confusion spread among the alien observers. They began to argue in their strange language, their glowing symbols flashing, faster than usual. The captives exchanged quick glances, silent understanding passing between them. Their trick was working. Over time, their defiance grew bolder. When the machines scanned for fear, they deliberately thought of peaceful things, memories of forests, oceans, laughter, and sunlight. When illusions showed destruction, they imagined rebuilding, not ruin. Slowly, they were teaching the machines to read something the aliens did not expect, strength instead of weakness. But the true turning point came when the captives decided to create a pattern. They had realized the machines did not only record emotions but also rhythms, heartbeats, breathing, movements. By controlling these rhythms, the humans could create signals hidden in the data. At first it was small, a series of deep breaths at the same time, a quiet tap of fingers against their legs synchronized perfectly. These actions seemed random, but together they created patterns the machines would misinterpret. The aliens thought they were reading natural responses, but in reality the captives were sending messages to each other, coded through the very scans meant to control them. The more they practiced, the better they became. Soon, without a single word spoken, the humans could communicate entire thoughts with just a glance and a rhythm. What the aliens believed was meaningless movement was actually planning, coordination, and strategy. The prison had become their training ground. The aliens, still blind to the clever trick, believed the humans were becoming easier to control. Their readings showed calmness, order, and reduced panic. They congratulated themselves on breaking their subjects, never realizing they had been fooled. The captives now had the advantage. They understood their captors more than their captors understood them, and with that knowledge came the opportunity to strike. One night, if it could even be called night in a place without time, the aliens brought in a new machine. It was larger than the others, with spinning arms of light and a low hum that made the floor tremble. The purpose of this machine was different. It was meant to push the captives past their limits, to break their minds fully. But the humans were ready. As the AI machine activated, it released waves of energy that filled the chamber with blinding light. The aliens expected screams, collapse, and total surrender. Instead, the captives moved together. They breathed in unison, slowed their heartbeats, and began their coded rhythms. The machine's sensors struggled to interpret the signals, its lights flickering and sparking. The aliens grew frustrated, increasing the power. Yet the more they pushed, the more errors appeared. The captive's clever control had turned the machine against itself. The data became corrupted, showing results that made no sense. Fear registered as calm. Pain registered as laughter. Weakness registered as strength. The aliens panicked. For the first time, their confidence wavered. They whispered among themselves, their glowing eyes darting nervously at the humans who now stood tall, unbroken. The roles had quietly shifted. The captives were no longer test subjects. They were opponents. The cleverness did not end there. The humans began planting deliberate traps in the data. They gave the machines false patterns, leading the aliens to believe they had discovered something new. The aliens, obsessed with knowledge, followed those false trails eagerly, wasting time and energy. Meanwhile, the captives grew stronger, more unified and more prepared. Every day, the gap between captor and captive narrowed. The humans, once seen as fragile prey, were proving themselves to be something entirely different. Creatures who could endure, adapt, and outthink even the most advanced technology. The chamber, once a place of despair, now felt like a place of quiet victory. The captives still had no weapons in their hands, but they had built something far more powerful: control over themselves and confusion in the minds of their captors. The aliens, with all their machines and arrogance, had underestimated the human spirit, and now, without even realizing it, they were being outsmarted at every turn. The humans knew they weren't free yet, but freedom was no longer just a dream. It was a plan, carefully growing in the shadows of their captivity. The clever moves had turned into strategy, and strategy would soon become action. What had started as survival had now become a battle of wits. And in that battle, the humans were proving that no matter how advanced the captors might be, intelligence, unity, and willpower could turn even the weakest prisoner into the strongest opponent. The game had changed, and this time, it was the humans who held the advantage. The air inside the alien chamber was heavy with silence. The machines that once hummed with control now flickered uncertainly, as if they too were unsure of their purpose. The humans, once weak and frightened, stood with a different kind of strength. They had learned, adapted, and outsmarted their captors step by step. And now, they were ready for the final part of their plan: the escape. It had not been decided in a single moment. The idea of freedom had grown slowly, like a fire spreading from a spark. Every time the captives found a flaw in the system, every time they tricked the machines, and every time they confused their alien observers, that fire grew hotter. The aliens had unknowingly given the humans the greatest weapon of all: time, and the humans had used it well. The plan to escape was not about force. They had no weapons, no armor, no tools. It was about turning the captors' own arrogance against them. The aliens believed the humans were finally broken, their readings calm and obedient. What they didn't realize was that this calmness was carefully built, a disguise hiding sharp minds and stronger wills. The moment came during another round of tests. The aliens brought the humans into a larger chamber, filled with glowing panels and strange devices that hovered in the air. This room was different. It was closer to the heart of the ship, where the walls pulsed faintly with energy. The captives exchanged quick glances. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. The machines surrounded them, scanning and recording. Illusions of burning cities and collapsing skies appeared once again, trying to stir fear. But the captives remained still, their hearts steady, their minds focused. Beneath that calm, however, they began their silent code: the rhythms of breath, the subtle taps, the glances that spoke more than words. One pattern meant now. Another meant wait. And when the right moment arrived, one final pattern meant move. The first clever step was to confuse the machines. The captives deliberately filled the data with false signals, pushing the system into overload. The glowing panels began flashing too quickly, their lights turning uneven. The alien observers stepped closer, their focus shifting to the machines, instead of the captives. That was the opening. In a synchronized motion, the captives broke their formation. Instead of standing still like obedient subjects, they scattered to different corners of the chamber. Their sudden movements disrupted the machines further, making the sensors scramble to keep track of them. The aliens shouted in their strange language, their symbols glowing wildly across their skin. But before the captors could react fully, the humans acted. One captive leapt onto a hovering device, yanking it down with their weight. Another shoved against a glowing panel, causing it to spark and darken. A third moved silently toward the doorway, testing the strange barrier of light that sealed it. It flickered under their touch, weaker than expected. The aliens rushed forward, but their confidence faltered. They had grown too used to passive subjects. They had not prepared for resistance, let alone coordination. The captives did not fight with fists or weapons. They fought with disruption. Every step was meant to break the order of the chamber. A device was knocked over. A rhythm of heartbeats confused the sensors. A sudden shout of defiance echoed, bouncing off the walls and scattering the aliens' focus. The doorway flickered again, this time opening briefly before sealing once more. The captives saw their chance. They needed to overload the system completely. Working together, they created chaos in patterns. While some distracted the aliens by charging in unpredictable bursts, others targeted the machines directly. A synchronized stomp shook the floor. A sudden collective breath triggered sensors that could not process the identical readings. Sparks flew. Alarms rang out, and then the barrier broke. For the first time since their capture, the path ahead was open. A long corridor stretched. Beyond, glowing with alien light. The captives did not hesitate. They ran. The aliens gave chase, their voices sharp and urgent. But the humans had momentum now. Every corner they turned, every step they took, was powered by unity and determination. They no longer felt like prisoners. They felt like a single force, moving as one. The corridor led them through the heart of the alien ship. Strange machines lined the walls, pulsing with energy. Some captives quickly struck at them as they passed, leaving sparks and damage behind. Others kept watch, ensuring no one was left behind. They moved fast, but not recklessly. At one point, the aliens tried to trap them, activating a barrier of light ahead. But the captives had learned too much about their captors' technology. They remembered the flicker, the weakness in the systems when overloaded. Together, they pressed their hands against the walls, their heartbeats and breaths, aligned once again in perfect rhythm. The energy surged and the barrier cracked, then shattered. Step by step, the humans carved their way out. Finally, they reached a chamber that felt different from the rest. It was vast, with a towering window showing the endless stars outside. At the center was a structure that pulsed like a heart, the core of the ship. The captives knew this was their final test. If they could disrupt the core, the aliens would have no choice but to release them. If they failed, they would never see freedom again. They surrounded the core, their eyes meeting in silent agreement. No one needed words anymore. The plan was clear. They pressed their hands against the pulsing surface, their breathing in unison. Their thoughts focused not on fear, but on freedom, on sunlight, on open skies, on Earth. The core reacted, its glow flickering violently. The aliens burst into the chamber, shouting in panic. But it was too late. The humans had learned how to bend the machines to their will, and now, together, they pushed with everything they had. The core screamed with light. The walls trembled. The ship itself groaned as if alive. The aliens stumbled, their balance lost. The captives held firm, their unity unbreakable. And then, silence. The lights went out. The hum of the ship died. The aliens fell back in confusion, their symbols dimming. For the first time, they looked powerless. The chamber doors slid open. Beyond them was an escape vessel, its systems still alive. The captives did not waste a second. They rushed inside, their breaths ragged but steady. The controls were strange, glowing with symbols they could not read, but they had already learned the most important truth. Alien machines could be bent, confused, and controlled. They worked together, pressing patterns into the controls, repeating the same rhythm that had carried them through every trial. The vessel shuddered, then lifted. The aliens pounded on the walls outside, their glowing eyes wide with disbelief. And then, with a burst of energy, the vessel broke free. Out the window, the stars stretched endlessly. No longer a prison, but a promise. The humans did not cheer loudly. Their victory was quiet, steady, the kind that came from surviving the impossible. They looked at one another, exhausted but unbroken, and for the first time since their capture, they felt free. Behind them, the alien ship floated in silence, its proud captors left in confusion and regret. They had underestimated the very beings they thought were weak. They had tried to cage humanity, only to discover that humanity's true strength was not in weapons or technology, but in unity, cleverness, and the will to never give up. The captives, now survivors, turned their eyes to the stars. Their journey home would not be easy, but they had already proven the most important truth. Even in the hands of the most powerful captors, humans could never be truly broken. They had escaped, not just the ship, but the chains of fear. And somewhere, in the cold silence of space, the aliens learned their hardest lesson: that humanity was far too clever to remain in chains.